Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki. I am the events manager here at Nuspire, and I'll be your host for this live session. Today is part one of a two-part series that we're going to be walking you through a timeline of a real-world cyber incident. Then in 2 weeks, on June 6th, we'll be having part two, which will focus on mitigating risks and the long-term repercussions. So if you have questions during the presentation today, please go ahead and submit them to us. Our speakers would love to engage throughout and we'll address your questions as they see fit. Also, we will try and leave a few minutes at the end for questions. So we'll have that. So this webinar is being recorded. And just so you know, you will receive an email with a link to watch the recording and or share that. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today, Mike Pedrick and Chris Roberts. Mike is the VP of Cybersecurity Consulting here at Nuspire. He has been providing technology, security, compliance, and risk management consulting services to organizations across several industries for nearly 20 years. In addition to his role at Nuspire, he is an accredited trainer and chapter board member for ISACA, and he mentors cybersecurity and risk management professionals. Chris Roberts is Nuspire's chief strategist and is a leading figure in counter-threat intelligence and vulnerability research with over 25 years in information security, assessments, and knowledge of regulations. Chris is a highly credentialed voice in cybersecurity, often featured in major media outlets and speaking at conferences worldwide. Also, I'm excited to have the lovely Francie Dudrey joining us today. Francie is Nuspire's Senior Director of Content Marketing and Corporate Communications.
Yes.
And she's going to help us keep these fellows on track today.
I'm going to do my best. I mean, if anybody's joined our Socket to Me LinkedIn Lives, they can go off the rails quite easily. So I pledge to you, I'm going to try to keep them on task. Try is the keyword there.
Awesome. I'm so happy you're here. So before I hand this over, though, we'd like to get everyone's input on our poll. So let me go ahead and launch it here. Incident response poll. All right, so the question reads, how often does your organization conduct incident response drills or simulations? Weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually? Not yet, but we're planning to soon, or never. So we'll give that a second to populate. I see a lot of votes already coming in. Awesome.
I do want to complain that apparently there's a little red indicator down the bottom that says hosts and panelists can't vote. So I can't put my own votes in here. This is terrible.
No, Chris. No.
Really?
I'm sure we'll hear all about it once we get the results.
So we have, look, 80% participation. Awesome. All right, let's go ahead. I see some more coming in. All right, 85% I am good with. So let's, I'll end this poll and share the results here for you guys to go ahead and chat about.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Is this what you expected to see?
Yeah. The whole not less than annually thing, I think has gotten purchase out in the industry. So I agree with the annually value. I'm impressed that they're so close between annually and none yet, but we're planning to soon. It seems appropriate.
What about you, Chris? Any thoughts since you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the logic on this one is, I mean, the never and not yet together, unless I'm missing something, kind of outweigh most of the other stuff on this as well. So that kind of, at least if nothing else, gives us some validity as to why the heck we're doing this and why we're going to run it through a tabletop exercise. Because I mean, it's something we're going to get into. We'll talk about the logic, reasons, whys, and wherefores, and then hopefully we'll walk everybody through some of these this week and next week, and then off we go from there.
So it sounds as though the attendees can't see the poll results at this time. But just for everybody's edification, annually ended up with 17 out of 54 responses. None yet came in at 15 of 54 responses and never came in at 11. So to Chris's point, between none yet and never together, that's 26 out of 54. That's uncomfortably close to half.
Yeah. Which does, I mean, it's not, unfortunately, it's not surprising. I guess it's frustrating because, I mean, from a regulatory, legal, and compliance standpoint, that the whole idea of actually running an IR or running tabletops has been beaten into us for quite an extensive amount of time, shall we say. Yeah, I like Trenton's. By the way, we can't actually talk to everybody unless I'm just being nailed out. I can only
No, they can write in questions, but they can't unmute because we're
talk back.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing that and go ahead and take it away, Francie.
Yay. Okay, I have control now. I sound like, like pilots and co-pilots. I have control. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so agenda. So of course, if we're going to be doing an IR simulation, we need to provide the scenario. So we're going to set the stage for what we're going to be going through today. We're going to dive into that incident, talk about the technical stuff, which I will not be talking about since that is not my expertise, but I will smile and nod during that part. And then regulatory needs and checklist and Q&A. So remember, this is part 1 of the webinar series. We will be doing a bunch of other stuff, which I'll talk about toward the end for part 2. Okay. And then, yes, this session recording we will share with you. Some of these comments are fantastic, by the way. This is something Mr. Roberts provided for us. So I figure I'll give you the opportunity to talk about this.
This is the more civilized version. Let's be honest on this one. For those that know me, occasionally there's the odd one in it. So this comes down to what's called the 7 Ps. And Francie and the team at Nuspire have done a much more civilized version of it. Logic being quite simply, if you don't plan, you don't know. And it's from a military and a government standpoint, military probably more than government. The logic is quite simple. It's crawl, walk, run, dry fire, then live fire. And the logic basically being is, I'm not going to hand you, unless it's times of Extreme War, I'm not going to hand you a weapon, point you in the direction of the enemy and say, go, unless I have hopefully given you sufficient training. So when the first round comes whizzing over your head, you don't stand up like a spring chicken and get shot straight in the ass. And the same is exactly true within our industry. Unfortunately, as Mike and I and Francie have just seen, we'll just say 50% of you, unfortunately, the first time you are going to test for an incident is when something occurs, at which point, how many of you are going to reach for the A to Z yellow handbook or the internet, which you might not have access to anymore, and Google, how do I deal with an incident response, or who do I call, and the other 15 things that we're going to try and go through. That's not the time to do it. When the building is burning down is not the time to run a fire drill for the first time. So the logic here is very, very simple. We're going to run through this, hopefully give you some ideas and thoughts and reasons to actually plan effectively. And then per what Francie said on part 2 is then also help you. Trenton said, my execs are immature on the necessity. Well, we'll give you the logics and reasons whys and wherefores. And if that doesn't work, I think somewhere in the middle of all of these slides, there's an offer to come hang out with us, and we got a little bit of a discount and all that kind of good fun stuff. So I'll shut up at this point.
Let's do it. All right. So the scenario is going to be a ransomware attack. And we're going to dive in right now. I'm going to have Mike go through this because Mike developed this scenario. So over to you, Mr. Pedrick.
Oh, sure. Blame me for this. All right. So, and I'm sure a lot of us have been there. We've seen this sort of scenario unfold in the past. I've been a part of, on the defensive side, on the recovery side of several ransomware events. I won't admit to anything other than that. So at any rate, we've structured this such that it looks as though it would if you received this. So we'll just lay it out as a help desk ticket. And it reads from the title, I can't access my files. IT team, my PC started behaving strangely. There's now a dialog box on my screen that states that my content has been encrypted and some key data. They provided examples, though I don't recognize all of the file names, has been uploaded to an outside repository. There's a link for more information, but I haven't clicked it for security reasons. I cannot open any of the files that I need. My OneDrive, my desktop, the S drive. I've not checked the P drive yet or the G drive yet. Please help. I am unable to be productive, right? We've all seen tickets like this that say, I can't do what I need to do. And sometimes it's as innocuous as somebody dragged a file into the folder below it, etc. But in this case, we have enough to go on to say that this is a ransomware event, right? And so I'm just imagining, again, for any of you that have experienced this in real time, in real life, you got that chill down the back of your neck already, and you're starting to plan out, all right, what's screwed up? What do I have to go get? How bad is this, etc. You're already planning through or walking through the steps that you want to take. But let's unpack a couple of things first. Bottom line is, in a ransomware event, data is encrypted. Encryption is the jam. We love encryption. Encryption is very, very good for our industry, for us as individuals, etc. But when it's used against us in this way, well, it's a bad day, right? We pizza when we should have French fried. So anyway, it's a bad day when our data is encrypted. That data is unavailable to us. It's also not able to be decrypted without the decryption key. Now, elsewhere in this email, they mentioned that data has been exfiltrated. It's been removed from our environment, has gone off to parts unknown. Somebody else has that information. We don't know yet what kind of information, how sensitive it is, how critical it is, but we do know that that adds a layer of danger to this particular event. So we have to make a choice. Do we, tell the ransomware gang to take a hike and we're not going to pay the ransom, or do we pay the ransom to try to get our information back? So with that, let's
go to the next one. Okay,
Yeah.
you're gonna, yes. You tell me when. Hold on.
Go for it.
There, nailed it.
So
Okay.
this is minute one, right? So minute one, here's where we are. We've read the email. It's the first minute of our response. What are we going to do? Now, we asked the question, and Chris, I'm going to have you riff on this if you don't mind. We've asked the question, what is it that triggers the alarm in an event like this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're looking at this, so this is where it gets interesting, because you go back to the previous slide. Now we're making an assumption first and foremost that the user's articulate enough to write a very nice email like that, rather than just sending a ticket going, I can't work. Which, let's face it, 90% of the time. And then you spend 3 hours waiting in queue, then 4 hours waiting for something else. And minute one, let's face it, minute one typically isn't minute one. Minute one is somewhere down the line when eventually the IT folks come up to this, or what they're going to do if they have the right tools in place. What they're going to do is look on their, their EDR type system. They'll look on their event log monitoring system. They're going to try and get into this machine and go to try to get in. They'll try and remote into it. They'll try and do whatever they can do to get into it. Or if they're not looking at their logs, or somebody isn't looking at the logs, they're going to send a runner out to go deal with it, or they're going to have to get hold of their third party and try and deal with it that way. I mean, these are all additional delays that get built into this, unfortunately.
There's a lot that plays into that. Just to riff on that a little bit, Chris. This came in via email, right? If that email, that help desk ticket, is our first exposure to this particular event, it calls into question what other tools, what other things should we have in our environment to, identify when this sort of thing occurs, right?
Yeah.
We've got a file integrity monitoring solution that says, hey, a bunch of your data is getting changed at once, right? Like, what's going on there? But it also merits mention, just like you said, what if it's Monday morning? We're coming in on a Monday morning and this ticket was submitted on like a Saturday afternoon. Now this thing has been going on throughout the entirety of, the time between when it happened and when we saw it. How bad is it? If it's maybe there's more dynamics to this particular attack than we're aware of. Maybe there's somebody inside the environment, not just malicious script, but malicious actors.
I mean, to your point, I mean, I'm not going to launch, and I'll play for this second, I'll play the attacker. I'm not going to waste my time breaking into Mike's company or Francie's company just to launch one attack against one computer and ransomware one system. That is a waste of my time. It's a waste of my energy. It's a waste of my effort. It's a waste of my resources. As an attacker, I have to put food on the table. I've also got to pay for all the services I'm using. If I'm not a sophisticated attacker, I'm also paying a handler, and I'll be paying them quite a chunk of money. So I have to maximize my time in that company, which means I'm going to put multiple hooks in there. I'm going to put a couple of the ransomware type of initial systems. I'm going to have the printer attached to me. I'll have a couple of other file systems attached. If I've gotten the backups, I'll have done all this prep work before I hit the go button. And to Mike's point, unless your event log monitoring or your SIM or any of the other logging systems are correlated, or you've got deception tech or something in place that's correlated well enough to see these individual steps and tie them together, you're going to not see them. They'll just be independent incidents and maybe a couple of failed logins over here, or maybe an extra drive over here, or maybe something missing over here. You're not going to tie these pieces of the puzzle together.
Not in
Well,
minute
let's
one,
go.
anyway.
What did you say, Mike? I'm
I
sorry.
said not in minute one anyway.
Minute one. Yeah, but what about hour one?
Thunderbirds are go.
This is so I'm gonna give two responses here. And I hope that everybody takes this in the spirit intended. The vast majority of organizations that I've seen, the extent of the incident response plan is start waking people up, start calling people, right? Frantically, if you can. Just go down, call your boss, call their boss, call all your colleagues, call everybody whose phone is capable of ringing and get them into the conversation. It's an ad hoc process, but this is definitely one of those incidents where if we ask anybody on the team, is this a serious incident? Where does this rate on your incident, category list? It's number one with a bullet, right? Because this is going to be very, very big from the organization's perspective. It isn't that, Tom in accounts payable can't print. This is a ransomware event. This is very big. We might even have to call in law enforcement. Don't know yet, right? So that's typically what I see is that ad hoc process. Well, that costs us time as well, right? So that first hour is spent not just raising the alarm and raising everybody to what's going on, but also trying to figure out, do you know what the next step we should do is? Do you know what the next step is, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's not to throw anybody under the bus or any program under the bus. It's just when things go sideways, I've invoked this in past webinars, right? The Mike Tyson quote that, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. This is definitely a punch in the proverbial face. So, but what if you don't have a plan at all? So that's my hot take on the first hour. What do you got, Chris?
You summed it up, and actually, I think Carol Ann Jacobs said it on here perfectly, which is, I'd hope it's dust off the incident response plan. And I think that's the words there are dust off. And I think that's perfect. I mean, and it's true, unfortunately. And what I love about that is a couple of different things. If you play scenario one out, literally it's dust off. In other words, where is it? Who's got it? Whose desk is it hiding on? What drive is? Oh, we can't get to that drive anymore. Well, it's on Fred's. Oh, Fred's computer's nailed as well. So then you're starting to go, well, where's the plan? Who's got the plan? When was the plan last looked at? Have we updated it? Oh, shit, half the team aren't here anymore. Joe's gone there, Fred's gone there, Gina's gone there, Dominique is over there. And so now you're scrambling if you have a plan at all. So that's number one. Number two, number two, let's take a different tact on this one. And I love that Joel just set me up beautifully. Always have a hard copy. Love that until you can't get into the building. And we actually had one of those occur many, many years ago. An organization I was with was very close to a train track. And one of the carriages, unfortunately, not just derailed, but started to leak. And it was one of those fun little ones with all those wonderful symbols of death and destruction on it. So they called the whole place off. Nobody could get in the place for a week. And so your incident response plan's great until you can't actually get to the darn thing. So then you're like, okay, the what happens if? And so the logic on this one is very much a case of like hour one should be exactly to Mike's point. If there was what was the movie? I'm telling the smartest people in this room here, and every single one of you is going to go wake up another 100 people. It's that point in time where the core team is hopefully together. They've understood, they've recognized, and now it's time to go wake everybody else up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then let's look at hour two. Let's talk about containment.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to start?
Do you want me to wander around this one for a minute?
Yes, let's do
Right.
that.
All right. So if we take a look, so NIST actually has a fairly nice framework. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, if you look at NIST's incident response and incident response handling framework, it's very, very nice. And if you look at the stuff that Nuspire puts out, there's some fantastic stuff that we have when we talk about it. And we're going to go through this as well. Obviously, like anything, if you think of battlefield tactics, you think of anything like that, it's understanding, it's situational awareness. It's back to that, know what you're running into when you run into the building, the burning building. But then that next one is containment. In other words, how do we, as I said, how do we stop the bleeding? Or where is the bleeding coming from? If somebody's covered in blood and all of a sudden you're trying to wrap a tourniquet around their leg, but you realize their throat's cut, bit of a problem. And it's the same thing with the digital world. It's like, okay, now this isn't just cybersecurity. This isn't just legal compliance, regulatory. This is the network team. This is getting the web team together. This is getting a cloud team together. This is getting all those folks together and going, okay, what's our steady state? Which then takes a step back and goes, do you even know what a steady state is? Do you even know what assets you have, where your assets are? One of the biggest challenges I've seen companies doing is when you stand up and you go, hey, what do you have and how do you know it's protected? Is first, people don't know what they have. So how can you actually stop the bleeding if you don't know where your assets are in the physical world? And then when you start looking at a full data modeling and data handling standards, one of those first things you got to look at is, where is my data? What's the criticality of my data? Because again, I might have a ransomware attack and it might be on these two computers. Have at it. I don't care. There's nothing critical on these two computers. Enjoy yourself, ransom as much as you flipping want. My core stuff is over there, and I know that's protected. So if you don't know where your data is and you don't know what it is, then how the heck are you actually going to understand how critical this hour 2 is and how and where your containment is, let alone VLANing segmentation? All right, I'll shut up with the geek stuff for a second.
No, it's okay. I think I like that you teed that up, Chris. And actually, I want to riff on something that Trenton actually said in the chat. He said, if we better be doing isolation before hour 2. And I don't necessarily disagree, except I want to say, if what's about to come out of my mouth sounds like it came out of a textbook, again, I'll lean on the idea that I'm a trainer for ISACA. I teach multiple programs for ISACA as well as ISC squared and CompTIA. So at any rate, our process should be that we validate the incident itself, we contain the incident, we eradicate the source of the incident, and then we proceed into recovery. I'm not saying that your program has to be exactly that way or that regimented, but it does need to be, it does need to go through a logical process, right? We always look before we leap. We don't take action until we know what actions should be taken. So as much as I agree with the extent, or with the idea rather, that to the extent possible, we should be isolating systems immediately, we have to identify what systems should be isolated first, right? So we want to do some degree of analysis. Now, if some of you are starting to think to yourselves, well, I've identified the system that I got an email ticket on, and I've identified the S drive and the G drive or whatever it was elsewhere in that example. What if I don't have a mechanism for quickly and reliably identifying other places in the environment that have been encrypted? I don't typically try to sell technologies. I usually try to sell, people and process first, but realistically speaking, you need to have some visibility into your environment. So that containment piece is reliant on 2 things. 1, that you can see all of your assets, as Chris said, and 2, that you understand with no ambiguity where to prioritize your containment efforts. It's triage, right? You take the bleeding, the artery, the spewing artery first into the mess tent, or not the mess tent. Oh my God, the medic tent.
That was some bad food.
Now I'm derailed. Oh my God. I just dropped an Army Hammer joke
Oh,
into
beautiful. I love
anyway,
it.
So anyway, understand where to prioritize your efforts, because otherwise you're wasting time on things that may not be important to your organization.
Oh man, the comments here are good. Chris, thank you for responding to
I'm
the
enjoying
questions.
it. I love it.
I know this is your wheelhouse.
Oh,
You're
absolutely.
excited.
I love the
Let's-
conversations here.
So let's talk. We're going to jump a little bit because we're not here to give you every single hour by hour. Nobody has time for that. So let's get to the next kind of chunk of time that's critical, hours 12 through 48. So let's talk about this. Mike, Chris, who wants to jump in first?
I'll jump in on this. I want to say a couple things. I want to set the table if I can, because, Chris and I have overlapping but slightly different experiences through our careers. I have been involved in ransomware events in the past that were devastating. I was actually part of a ransomware event at a service provider where it wasn't just us, but many of our clients who were compromised simultaneously. So it hurt. It hurt quite a lot.
This was not Nuspire.
It was not Nuspire.
I do want to say that. Okay.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed. Not Nuspire. Let me reinforce that. Not Nuspire. So, but anyway, what I want to say is at this point, and probably even before this point, right? Public relations is a thing. Getting legal involved is a thing. Having your insurance provider involved is a thing. Because the way we've laid this out, at some point you have to engage with the ransomware gang or attacker or whomever it is, right? Whether it's to, tell them they're number one and they're not getting any money out of you, or to try to negotiate on the ransom that they're asking for. I'm often an advocate for the idea that your first and only communication to the ransomware gang is to say, this is how much I have. Does it get it done? Right? That's it. If you've decided that you're going to pay the ransom to get your information back because the consequence is too great, don't negotiate. Don't try to talk them down. Don't try to lie to them to say that you're a much smaller organization than you actually are. They know. They've been in the environment long enough that they know you better than you do. And so it's just, this is what I got. Does it get it done? If it does, great. Awesome. Let's figure this out. Right. Because you're not a master negotiator, promise. Your insurance provider might have one though. So skip the step of engaging with the ransomware gang and call your insurance provider and have them do the same. At any rate, at this point, we've gone through containment, we've stopped the bleeding in our environment, but now we really need to get engaged with legal, PR, executive leadership, potentially law enforcement, and so on. And the one other thing that I want to put out there is that in terms of external communications, if your title doesn't start with a chief, you're not legal counsel, you're not public relations, you don't speak. Mum's the word.
Yeah, and I will say, from my background, working for large international telecom companies, I worked on media relations, internal communications. And so we did do these types of exercises where we'd figure out, okay, at this hour, who's going to do this? Who's going to be commenting on stuff? When are we actually going to say something? Do we need a holding statement to let people know we understand something's going on? And we'll get back to you once we know more information. But it's critical you get those folks involved because, yes, you do not want folks who don't have experience talking externally, whether it be to the media, to regulators, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, you don't want that happening. So, Chris.
It's all right. I'm responding to a few people. I'm having fun with this one.
I'm so glad you are.
So here's a good one on this one. Hours 12 to 24. This is where it gets interesting, especially if you are running the incident. And we haven't really touched upon this yet to a certain degree. But let's face it, when all of a sudden we started waking people up, people inside the organization, outside of legal counsel, everybody else, want answers. So typically, and Mike's been in this, I've been in this, and probably a bunch of folks on here have probably been in this as well, which is a bunch of us are heads down trying to get shit figured out. We're both triaging, we are trying to keep the company alive, and we're also trying to figure out what the fuck happened. At the same time, you got a whole bunch of leadership are going, like the kids in the back of the car, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Is it done yet? How about now? How about now? How did it happen? What do we say? How did it happen? What did we lose? Where's our stuff? Did it go? Have we lost it? How about now? How about now? And so one of the biggest things on this hour 12 to 24, in fact, probably even prior to that hour to 24, but really hours 12 to 24 is when it gets sorted out, which is, all right, now we're getting to see a little bit more of what's going on now. We're getting some clarity now. We've actually got people awake and caffeinated, and we've got teams focused on certain things. Now we have a slightly clearer picture that we can start to go back to the board, go back to leadership and go, okay, this is what we see. this is critically important time to get that messaging correct. You don't just walk in and go, hey, this is what we saw and this is what happened, because shit's going to change. And I think this is one of those things we unfortunately tend to forget is this is a live situation. Things change. All of a sudden, it's not the shooter on the grassy knoll that actually did it. It's something behind the scenes that we weren't aware of, or it's something planted. There's all of these other factors that if we too quickly and to emphatically go to the board, or we go to our public relations or communications people without validating. And this is where that whole, hey, I saw this, great, now I need somebody else to validate this one. And so that's another big one as well, is like, okay, I saw this on the firewall. Where else did you see it? Are we chasing down false positives? Are we looking at rabbit holes? Are we following false trails? All of these other things come into play during this time to get a much more effective focus point for the entire investigation and how serious it is. Because now we're starting to get to a point where, back to the earlier conversation about external communications, the internal in-house counsel is going to be sitting there going, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to say anything. Prove to me that data left. Prove to me that they haven't just done this. Prove to me this. And what's the definition of proof? And all these other fun conversations have to occur. And one minute you might turn around and go, hey, we didn't see anything. And then you start doing forensics on another system over here to find out it got pwned 7 ways from Sunday. And all of your data isn't actually in China. It's sitting in North Korea. Oops, we missed that one. And so this is where things continually develop. So you've got to have somebody who's got ridiculously strong communication and almost translation skills between what are they seeing technically and what are they seeing at a strategic level. Mike, I mean, where's your thoughts on that one?
The person who's involved, the orchestrator, the incident commander is of the utmost importance.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot possibly be just the first person who got involved or the person who happens to be drawing oxygen in that moment, in that place, in that moment. You've got to be very careful on who you choose for that particular role. This should be a choreographed response. We should know what to expect. We should know whom to call. But we'll talk more about that when we get to the practical guidance part.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing from the external comms situation. There's always that pressure, like what's happening. I would get calls from reporters from all these big publications, like, why is this service down? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like feeling that pressure. And there's that want to give them something. And when you give them incomplete information or wrong information, that's the first thing that goes out. And that's the thing that everybody remembers. So when you try to correct it, it doesn't matter. That's the initial information. That's what people are gonna hold on to. So holding statements, I think, are very helpful. All right, let's go to the next slide. 72. So this is 3 days later, and this is regulatory and fiduciary. Regulatory, Mike, it's your fave.
It is absolutely my favorite. Yay. All right, so we picked this number specifically, 72. There's a lot of regulatory verbiage out there that suggests that once you've identified an event as actually an incident, it has a materiality of loss to the organization, and specifically with regard to what would be in scope for personal data or information that would be subject to privacy legislation or breach notification legislation, that 72 hours is a magic number. It says that you have 72 hours to notify interested parties of this particular event. And so I shouldn't say event, of this incident, right? So you should have a game plan. 2 things. One, by what criteria are you going to decide that an event has become an incident? Similarly, by what criteria are you going to decide that that incident has material impact to the organization? It can't be ad hoc. You can't just stick a finger in the air and say, yeah, I think I'm going to call this one a serious incident. You have to have a documented and defensible response for that. The other thing is, again, who gets notified and when? And when you set aside your timeline and say, I notified these people on Thursday of an event that occurred on Tuesday, or it was declared an incident on Tuesday, trust that somebody in the conversation is going to ask the question, did it happen on Tuesday? And if you say, well, no, it actually happened on Saturday. So help me understand what happened between Saturday and Tuesday then when it was, lingering. Did you not know about it, right? One of two things is true. You look incompetent or you look negligent. So you have to be very careful. That 72-hour number is very important. There's a full 16 states in the US now that have privacy legislation modeled after GDPR. Your state may be one of them. So it's worth knowing that 72 hours is a hard line in the sand with regard to notification and who's going to find out.
Now, I have a question around that because, well, a couple. One, you said state level. So to be clear, there's nothing federal. So
Not yet.
Not yet. That's something that people are pushing for because there's just so much confusion around different states. It's not a standard that's easy to follow. Second, you were talking about reporting, and I know that the SEC, is it a 3 or 4 day turnaround time if you're publicly traded to report a breach? I think they just put out something recently. If you're like a company that handles money in the financial services, it's like they've come down pretty strongly on those reporting requirements.
Yes. And the point is, don't make them come after you for that information, right? If they find out about it the same way as your customers do via the press, it's going to be very, very painful. There's going to be hell to pay in those conversations. Eric asks, is that 72 hours after you have verified the breach? I want to say two things. The first is, as I mentioned, you have to have a defensible and documented mechanism for justifying the transition from event to incident. Full stop. The other thing I will say is, yes, the letter of the law, so to speak, and again, they change, and I'm not a lawyer, don't take this as legal advice, is that you verify the breach and now the clock has started. But you don't get to stick your fingers in your ears and say, la, 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 I don't know anything about a breach, right? That's not a thing.
Do that, yeah.
Yeah, don't do that. Because here's the other thing that I think, Chris, you hinted at, or maybe Francie, you hinted at as well. When stuff like this happens, right, you can count the number of minutes before somebody is ready to file a class action lawsuit against your organization, because there's blood in the water. There's money involved here. And especially where your customers are potentially caught up, or your suppliers or partner organizations, if there's any that gets on them, if there's any spatter that gets on them, or there's any undue risk to their entities, they may take action as well. So sitting on this, waiting on this, trying to be secretive, trying to sweep it under the rug is absolutely never the answer.
Well, and isn't there that extra layer that sometimes these ransomware operators will report the breach to the SEC to really just give it to you?
We did see that recently, yes, that there was an organization that was trying to keep things secret. They weren't paying the ransom, or they did pay the ransom, and the ransomware gang still tattled to the world on them.
No honor among thieves, I suppose.
That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
No, I mean, it's simple. I mean, this is, I hate to say it, I love it, because unfortunately the criminals have learned from our bad efforts, because we don't want to say anything. And we don't want to say anything because we want to make it go away, and we're not going to pay, and we're going to see if we got backup. So we're going to do all these other things to try to avoid it. Meanwhile, hey, I'm not putting food on the table. I'm not getting my money. I've put all this effort into breaking into your sorry ass state company because you can be bothered to fix all the patches, and you can be bothered to do this, and you hadn't done any training of your end users, and you hadn't spent time educating people, or people hadn't listened and they don't want to listen until they get their fingers burned. So I've spent precious hours. I want to get some flipping money out of this. And so I've been nice. I've given you a amount of time to get it figured out, and you're still faffing around, and you're still playing me the same way you're playing the government, the same way you're playing every other flipping company you're dealing with. I'm not going to stand for it. Pay up, or I'm going to basically alert the authorities for you.
Brutal.
But
okay.
truthful. It's a business.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This is a business. Get every single piece of emotion out of it. This is nothing more than a financial transaction.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go. So let's talk a little bit more about this. Mike, do you want to go through this, since I know this is your passion right here?
Yeah, actually,
We
although
kind of did talk about it a
I
little
did,
bit.
yeah,
but-
I got a little bit ahead of myself there. Ditto.
Perfect.
Well, one thing I want to put out there, and it actually, I was thinking of this, Chris, as you were talking. We've already talked about the idea that if you have legal counsel, you want to get legal counsel involved ASAP, right? Or ASAFP, depending on your state of mind. Anyway, get legal involved. Understand that we are risk practitioners. Legal counsel is also a risk practitioner, right? But we may not have the same information. We may not have the same biases or the same, guidance for executive leadership. The legal counsel may say you shut your mouth and you don't say a thing until you have to, right? That's a reasonable stance to take from an attorney's perspective. They may not be aware of some of the regulatory requirements that are on the organization and some of the potential pitfalls. And so I'm a strong advocate for the idea of when you engage legal in these conversations, you want to make sure that there is a clear, collaborative dialogue between the information security and GRC apparatus and that legal counsel. We've seen it play out in the news for some very, embarrassing breaches for organizations, in our space, right? Where they wait too long to put the information out and suddenly it looks like they were trying to hide it, or they put the information out too soon and they look like idiots, right? Understand that every one of those conversations that occurred, somebody was in the conversation saying, do we tell them? Do we not tell them? What do we tell them? What should we say? What should we put out there? And they just got guidance from somebody in the dialogue. So again, collaborate with legal to the extent that you can, and then some.
Okay. And this time flies by. I know I'm the timekeeper. I think I'm a little behind,
yeah.
folks.
No,
I'm gonna
you're
lose
fine. I
my
like it.
timekeeper badge. Okay, let's run through this and then we can talk a little bit more about what we have coming up and take some questions. But Chris, do you want to kind of go through this part?
Yeah, I think it's one of those, and I'm talking backwards and forwards to a couple of folks on here, and it's the basics. I mean, it's going to happen, no matter the best preparation in the world, all this other stuff, and for crying out loud, please do not believe those organizations and those companies out there that turn around and say they can stop the unknown unknowns. I had another person hit me up and like, hey, I'm in a stealth company and we're going to prevent ransomware and we're going to take a new approach to cybersecurity. Good luck. It isn't going to happen because this is nothing more than a game of chess. And unfortunately, we are not sophisticated or advanced enough, quite honestly, to get past seeing maybe one move ahead. We're just not there. For those of us that play chess, we're seeing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 moves ahead. In the digital world, we're lucky if we see one move ahead. So it's going to happen. And there's nothing you can be able to do to stop it, unfortunately. The challenge is, as always, how quickly can you discover that something nefarious is occurring on your system? What can you do about it? And how quickly and effectively and efficiently can you actually recover? We've forgotten about the old world of backups. We've forgotten about all these other things. We've forgotten how to prepare. When you go into a kitchen, let's give a simple analogy. Hopefully most of us here cook. You don't simply walk into a kitchen, open up the fridge, throw 10 random ingredients on the stove and make cuisine. It might be interesting. It's probably not going to crawl away and it might taste good in slices, but it sure as hell isn't something you want. You sit down, you're like, okay, what are we in the mood for this evening? What do we want this evening? What tools am I going to need? What ingredients am I going to need? Where are those ingredients? Do I have them? Do I need to go buy those ingredients? Who can actually help me? Who's going to prep everything? When are we going to do it? What's my timing on it? And off we go. And hey, presto, every single evening, most of us make a decent meal for a family. That's preparation. We do it every single bloody night. We do it. We need to do it during the day in our business. And as Mike and we've all alluded to, that clock's ticking. It doesn't stop, and every single minute counts, especially once you've realized. Because leading up to that realization is user sees something, help desk eventually gets to it, technical team look at it, somebody else says something, and then maybe somebody puts a ticket in with security. If you don't have an MSSP or you don't have an effective knock or sock of your own team, you don't have good eyes, that can take an extended period of time. There's a lot of breaches out there that we know take from days, some of them don't, thankfully, but from days to weeks to months to even longer. And so in the physical world, a 6'3" large, hairy Scottish Englishman is walking around your house and you haven't seen me. I've peed in the plants in the corner. I've eaten the fridge. I've left the toilet seat up. I've rumbled through your mail and you haven't seen me. That's the biggest challenge. And unfortunately, if you're not prepared and you haven't watched the clock and you haven't practiced anything, it's going to take you weeks and months to get rid of me. Simple as that.
I'll never get that visual out of my head ever. So I appreciate that. Oh yeah, Mike, he did just say eat the fridge.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, he sure did.
Did you have to
Ryan's
pee in the
mad
plants?
about-
Yes, I had to pee in the plants.
I mean, of course.
I'm mostly house trained-ish, but I'm
So
still
disrespectful. And then okay, yes, and the practice and everything. I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I think there's also this, where do I start? It's so much work to do, you know, this practice, like you need a full day, you need every department and you know, their firstborn to join, you know, these exercises. I think there's other ways to do it that you've talked about a lot. So we're going to get into more of that in our part 2. So this was more of introducing, discussing kind of what's happening, some initial things you can do, but I think that's where the issue lies. It's like, oh my God, where do I start? And so who wants to run through this one?
Chris, go ahead.
Chris, it's you. You peed in the plant already. Let's
Man, I love my attack methodology, and I feel bad for Mitra at the moment because they're also under attack as well, because let's face it, they put out absolutely amazing stuff. And this is, you know, it's one of those interesting things. Again, I'm going to put my adversary hat on because I enjoy that side of the world. You know, Mike is sitting there. Mike and Francie are both dispensing amazing information to the entire audience here. Well, that sucks. I'm sorry. That's got to stop. That's a terrible thing. As an attacker, I don't want everybody knowing stuff. Just stop it. Just stop telling my tactics. Stop giving my procedures. Stop telling people about my tools. Stop giving my bloody secrets away. Those are hard-earned things that I need to put food on the table for. And so you're all giving it away. So now Mitra has done a fantastic job of doing this, and they've told everybody. Now they're unfortunately under attack because they're trying to tell people what's going on. So learn it, understand it. Understand that this is business. I'm sorry for all of you, but you're all my food as far as I'm concerned, because most of you, unfortunately, haven't done the basics, haven't done the simple stuff, haven't done the easy stuff. You are nothing more than good old cannon fodder. And especially those of you who unfortunately haven't done tests, haven't run anything, and haven't planned on doing anything, you make easy cannon fodder. You know, I live in an apartment here, and I walked in and they have these little digital locks, and I just giggled. And very quickly, I've got all the combinations for everybody in the apartment complex. I handed the thing a couple of weeks ago to somebody and said, this is easy. Stuff is still too easy. We make it too easy. So I think understanding your surroundings, understanding your environment, understanding threat intelligence, and where that comes into knowing, are you actually a prime target now, or are you a target eventually? And then looking at the internal part of the organization. I didn't pee on the locks. No, I didn't pee on the locks, but I did pee on the plants, which didn't really help because the cicadas are out in the billions. The streamlining of response is a huge one. A lot of times, you know, Mike will probably say this one as well, is know who you're going to have to call next. And it doesn't actually have to be a named person, because guess what? It's going to change on a regular basis. We hire and fire people faster than we have dinners sometimes. So the ability to actually go, oh, I need to get hold of the C-level. I need to get hold of this role, and understanding that one. Proactive coverage, rapid response is a big one. Again, when the building is on fire, it is not the time to pick up the A to Z and start flicking through to see which one of your friends you can call, or putting a call out on LinkedIn or the Slack channel or the Discord channel going, hey, I think I've got a problem. Too late.
Right. Yeah, so I think it's going to be more of like the tactical, what do you do strategy kind of thing in our second part. So if you haven't signed up, I know Gina will probably put a link in the chat, but we do have some resources. So we did create an incident response checklist. I can say that. Gina, were you going to go through this? I'm stealing your thunder.
No, you're good. You're good. But yes, I will take it for this slide. But I wanted to thank you guys for running through that scenario. That was a little intense, wasn't it? To hear the actual how it actually goes for these organizations that get breached. And special thanks to Francie for moderating today.
This was fun.
So if anyone does have any questions, we will probably have 5 minutes here, if not a few more, that we could take a couple more. Go ahead and put those in there. But I do want to, Francie already mentioned next week's, or the next part 2, 2 weeks from now. We'll gather here again to really dive into those techniques that will help you stay composed when the cyber incident does happen. So here is the link to
Yes, we've got lots of
register
links.
for
Brilliant. You're
that.
awesome. Thanks, Gina.
Part
'Cause, yeah,
2.
somebody just asked how do they get the links.
Where are the links? I know.
There's
It's like we
that one.
hyperlink it in the presentation, but you guys can't click on your Zoom screen.
Yes, and here
know.
are the links to these resources as well, which will also, all of this will be in an email that comes out tomorrow as well. So
Yeah, the other thing that Bob Burns just said something actually, which is really interesting. Bob's like, hey, looking for the tabletop examples to use. I mean, we've got a bunch. I mean, some of these slides were pulled from Mike and I's stuff from a while ago. So I don't know if we have like a set of tabletops, but I mean, I know I've got a bunch of slides. Mike, you have. Maybe that's something we can do for part 2 is we'll between now and part 2, we can rustle up. Why don't we rustle up half a dozen tabletop exercises ranging from simple, literally sit down over lunch ones to slightly more complex measle versions.
Yeah. And then, so we had talked about this earlier. I think so folks were saying at the very beginning, they're like, I want to do all this stuff. I really need to, you know, how do I do it? And maybe I don't have the resources. Tabletops are a really good way to do that. We have an incident response readiness service, and we're offering a special deal for folks, 33% off for only people who attended this or registered. And so we'll put the link in if you want to learn more about that. I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk a little bit about it since you were the one who runs this.
Yeah. So the key takeaway here is that we have a robust consulting team, a really great consulting team. And so if you engage with us, we'll set aside a scenario. We can negotiate the scenario, come up with a scenario that you know causes your blood to go cold, and then we'll bring everybody into a conversation and talk through that process. Now, it's not just a Dungeons and Dragons style conversation. It also includes, we'll talk through what should we do, what systems can we identify should have noticed or alerted somebody to this particular condition, et cetera. And then also come back with a findings presentation. And the idea here is that it's not just the IT team that comes to the table. It is literally everybody who would be involved in that type of incident. So we can also help you to crowbar the boss into that conference room for that particular event as well.
Yeah. Because I think for folks, especially those that aren't in it every day, it's hard to kind of convince them like, yeah, we got a problem. We need to start putting resources toward it. But when you do a tabletop, you see it in real life and you're like, oh, okay, 100%. That would really suck if that happened.
Yep. I wanted to touch on, I see that Chris is typing a response, but Tony in the Q&A asked, does Nuspire have any recommended legal sources for when it hits the fan? I'm interested in seeing what Chris says, but I'm also going to put out there that a general bit of advice, assuming I understand it and am interpreting the question correctly. If you have cybersecurity insurance currently, route all of those questions through them. They often have resources that they have in their pocket as part of the premium that you're paying. They'll call a Kroll or whoever it is to come do forensics analysis. And like, there's no shame. It's not a referendum on you as a professional to say, I'm not touching it. I'm calling somebody else in, because that somebody is who's going to take the stand in a legal proceeding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's actually, that's a really, really good point. I think if I remember rightly, I'm court certified in like Ohio, Texas, Colorado, and a couple of other places, like expert testimony for forensics, like 4 or 5 different states. Because, and I've also done the cross-examination, all that other kind of crazy stuff. Yeah, it's because you don't want your own team on. You don't want your own team on. Oh, you don't. No matter how much training you put them in practice course, you just don't. It ain't pretty. Yeah, good point, Mike. Like seriously, seriously, good point.
Oh, Bob just said, last place he was at, everyone at the tabletop just said, IT handles that.
Yep. Yep.
So sorry, Bob.
I'm just
Oh
gonna
my
call
gosh.
IT
No,
and
he's
that's
right.
it.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
the problem. I mean, I think this is where, and the mentality is starting to shift as long as you've got, this is back to the soft skills. This is about communication, collaboration, all those other soft skills that we tend to have forgotten, which is, you're right. You know, IT and security, it's our job to coordinate. It's our job to work the system and the process. But oh, y'all, you're all in this together. We're all in the same boat. We all need to be rowing, preferably in at least generally the same darn direction.
Yes.
Let's face it, we're all getting the same paycheck from the same damn computer. And if that computer is infected, we all be in trouble.
Absolutely. Okay, do we have any other questions? I'm very proud of us. We stayed on task and on
I
time.
see one more question. Looks like we
Okay.
have a few more minutes. I see one more question here. So how do I get my boss to sign off on conducting regular IR simulations?
Oh, yeah, that's the nut to crack. Yeah.
It's not a sign off. Lunch and learns. This isn't a
Yeah.
sign off. This is a lunch and learn. Approach it differently. You're not looking to your boss to sign off. You're gonna, at the worst case scenario, maybe you personally are out of pocket for 24 donuts and a container of Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
I would also say that if we want to get them involved, and we do, like I said, I want them in the conversation. I want them in the conference room. I want the opportunity to interrogate them as well. Maybe that's strong phrasing, but I've already given it oxygen. I'll leave it there. So it isn't necessarily that they're signing off on a thing that they're going to pay out of pocket for and never hear about again. You're engaging them in the process. You're involving them in the process. And I think it should be a relatively open conversation to have if you're speaking in terms of risk to the organization, not a thing I want to do because it's neat and new and sexy and sounds like a great way to tie up an afternoon for everybody. So again, if you express it in terms of risk, we're trying to head off the lost time spent on an ad hoc response to an incident. We're trying to develop an incident response process. One other thing I will put out there is going back to the concept of cyber insurance. Your insurance provider is going to give you a list of requirements, things that you must have in your program. I would bet dollars to donuts that if you show them that you have a robust and rehearsed incident response plan, your premiums will be lower.
I'll add to that one. I will validate that one. For 2 years, at the prior organization I was at, we got our insurance premiums lowered, partly because we actually follow the NIST cybersecurity framework and could accurately demonstrate that we were progressing. But secondly, because we conducted effective tabletop exercises on a cyclical, regular basis, and it wasn't. We started off, and exactly to this point, and Andy said it beautifully, which is social engineer them. And it's, you start off small, you start the groundwork. You get everybody, you get people, oh, that was fun. Hey, we got to kill off the CFO this week. Next week, we're going to burn the building down. Yay. You know, I mean, it's make it
The Tom Sawyer approach. Is that what
Yeah.
we're going with? Yeah.
I mean, honestly, typically, and this is maybe, so here's where it gets fun. Mike is nicer than I am. Mike will come in. If you want the civilized, somebody to come in and explain things to you in an amazing way, get Mike. If you want somebody to come in and basically the first words out of their mouth is like, hey, how can I kill the company? That'll be me.
And a lot of cuss words too. Just
I have
peppered
done
in.
pretty good here. There has been minimal effing and blinding.
I only heard a few F-bombs and maybe
I
some.
didn't drop an F-bomb, only because Gina's watching and Shannon's behind the scenes, and I know if I have an F-bomb, the haptic feedback keyboard will zap me. So I don't want to be zapped yet.
And
No,
I saw that Dorinda has a question. I know we're at time, so maybe we can shoot her a note after, because I think
Where's
this
that?
one might
Oh, there it is.
fire a
Hang
little
on.
bit.
We have insurance through
Is that something you could
Nine
answer quickly? I know you got to
kilograms,
run.
How do we define job? Oh, ooh, I like that one. That's a good one.
Let's unpack that. Dorinda, are you okay with us using that as a larger point of conversation in our next session?
Yes, she's in the question and answer, but
Awesome.
maybe we just hang on to it
Yep, let's do that. She said
and
she
talk
would.
it through, because I think there's a bunch of different people involved. How do you
Yeah, there's
coordinate?
a lot. We're going to spend another 20 minutes on that, I bet.
That's what I was like, we probably should. Yes.
Yeah, and
Perfect. Okay, I
unfortunately, I
captured
have
it.
to go get my teeth examined and get yelled at.
Yeah, so I'll wrap it up here, right at the top of the hour. But if anyone has any other questions, feel free to email us, at webinars@nuspire.com. I'd be happy to make sure we address those, as well as, upon exiting the webinar, there is a short survey that will pop up, and we'd certainly appreciate any feedback that you have for us today. On that note, any closing thoughts from any of you guys?
I'm excited for part 2. I think we're going to have a lot of fun in that one. We're going to dig in.
I needed this, so thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Just this was needed and this was appreciated, and I love the fact that we got so much engagement. Thank you so very much. And again, Francie, Gina, and everybody behind the scenes, thank you all for putting this on. Hugely appreciated.
You bet. All right. Well, thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Yes, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.